Hey, folks, welcome to Pete and John Talk Fishing, brought to you by AMSOIL. And I'll tell you what, Pete, this is going to be an exciting thing that we're going to do every month, kind of talking about not only fishing techniques, but conditions, where to fish, what to use, that type of deal. This is going to be a lot of fun, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it will be fun, actually. I always like to talk fishing, and I enjoy talking fishing with you, so yeah, it should be great.
Well, I think before we get into the current conditions and whatever, we'd be remiss not to talk about the weird weather that we experienced in December and January. You know, we were so warm down here in southern Wisconsin, we didn't get safe ice until last week. And you can tell the folks the conditions up there in Sawyer County and Bayfield County, and I talked to Rob, Vilas County. It's all pretty much a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And, I guess I haven't heard definitively yet if, this is more snow than we've ever had up here, right in, my area here in my lifetime. It almost seems like we've never had that much in December and January, I don't believe. I would have to guess that we have over our total snowfall easily for the whole year on average at this point. And it came fairly early, and, the lakes had very little ice when it started coming. I believe the first snowfall was something like 28 inches and wet. And it's been coming ever since. So it's, as you well know, because we were trying to actually get together and ice film up here. We've ice filmed a lot, but we basically, I wouldn't say unable, but horrible to try and film here with the amount of slush that we've had and the conditions that we've had overall. So, and now finally some cold, but it's overall warm, though.
Yeah, but I talked to Rob over in Vilas. They had good conditions for a while. That's miserable over there again as far as slush and everything is concerned. Guys can't get around unless you got a snowmobile. Now, the good news is North Dakota, Devil's Lake, good travel over there. And you and I have spent a lot of time in northern Minnesota this year. Those conditions are very good, right?
Yeah, I think they remain that way as well. I've been keeping in touch with some guys over there, and I haven't been over fishing, but I mean, there's been a little bit of snow. So it seems like they're somehow lucky over there dodging the large snowfalls. And, things remain good. But, I will say more than any other year I can remember, to a certain extent, you got to choose your fishing, basically by ice conditions, much more so than I ever remember, with the amount of snow we've gotten. So some places are great and other ones are pretty tough. One thing I noticed here now with this cold snap, that, somebody has to unfortunately suffer. But if you go out now and somebody actually drills a big area out and that area floods and you're walking around there, then you can come back and fish the same area comfortably after that, but there's still slush everywhere else at this point.
Well, the good news is January's over. I've been doing this show 31 years now, and I can tell you, I really hate the month of January. Looking ahead to February, there's light at the end of the tunnel as far as winter is concerned, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, from a strictly an ice fishing standpoint, it's kind of cool here because, being close enough to Lake Superior like I am, you get a little bit of a boost of something new to do because you're gaining ice up there generally on Lake Superior, and it gives you a little more, something new to do. Generally, it is kind of the doldrums to a certain extent in the middle of winter. I guess you could compare it to the middle of summer. They talked about the dog days of summer for years and years when it comes to fishing can be a little tougher. I think just in general with these inland lakes, right smack dab in the middle of winter, it's generally a little bit tougher. And that's why you say you're happy, obviously, to be through January and into February here. But and then, once you get into March, though, things perk up again. In the state of Wisconsin here, it's a panfish bite only, but it generally gets better, and the fish get more active, and you can find some really good bites again in March.
Well, that brings us to fishing opportunities in February, and I'll kind of start down here in the southern part of the state. In February, there's actually some significant open water fishing that you can do. I mean, I want to talk about Lake Michigan. Last week we were off of Chicago in a boat fishing lake trout. Fabulous fishing. I mean, we probably caught 28 Lakers in a couple-hour period. You can do the same thing off of Milwaukee, Port Washington. And also, people don't realize that there's some really good stream and river fishing that occurs in the month of February. On the Milwaukee River is one of the best, the Manitowoc River, the Sheboygan River. If they're free of ice, there's steelhead and there's brown trout in there. And one of the greatest techniques is to just use a bobber and some skein or spawn sacks and cast upstream and let it float down. And you can really do really well on some of these streams and rivers. And also, as far as open water fishing is concerned in February, the Mississippi River by Red Wing, Minnesota, below the dam, that river stays open all winter long. The saugers and the walleyes start coming up in February. Really good spot to try for open water. And usually in the month of February, too, Pete, you can fish the Wisconsin River in the Dells area there. Saugers and walleyes bite pretty good. And you touched on it before about northern Minnesota. You and I were over there at least twice this year for ice fishing. And tell the folks, some of those lakes over there in the Longville, Grand Rapids area have some tremendous pan fishing through the ice in February, don't they?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. We've talked about it too, and I will say to a certain extent, it's like anything else. There's going to be good days, bad days type of thing. But overall, the panfish are a little better quality over there. And frankly, strictly because I think they started protecting them, a lot sooner over there, knocking those limits down and having some special regulations and quite a bit of awareness of, that you really need to, protect the genetic strains of some of these bigger fish. So it's in this particular year, it's an opportunity in a couple ways because it's much more comfortable fishing from a traveling standpoint, but also if you're the type of person that's interested in the trophy aspect of having an opportunity to catch a bigger crappie or a really big bluegill or possibly a big perch. Now, in general, you to a certain extent have to give up the idea that you're going to bring home a bunch of fillets because your limits are down, and frankly, both you and I would like to see all of those bigger fish released, period, to keep the fishing good. But if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to go just for the fun of it and keep a handful of medium-sized fish, it's a good trophy opportunity if you're really into that. If you want to have a bluegill literally cover your whole hand, there's some pretty good opportunities there.
Yeah, and I also want to mention, they do have roads plowed on Winnebagosh this year, one of the bigger lakes up there. And the perch aren't as big as they used to be back when you and I fished there in the late 90s. But they're getting a lot of 8-9 perch. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of small walleyes that they're catching on Winnie. Red Lake up there, the big lake, is still producing walleyes. And that's an interesting fishery. You and I have fished Red Lake through the ice before. It's a big shallow lake, right?
Oh, Red is, yeah. Yes, that is large and flat and expansive. Max depth is something like 18 feet or something. It's basically flat, but it's a tremendous fishery. It kind of comes in waves. With the fish species that are really good. Walleye, though, has been just really good for quite a few years now. There was a spell there about a decade ago where they really had some tremendous crappie fishing. They're still in there, but not as good as it was. And all the way through, it's really kind of a trophy opportunity comparatively for northern pike. It's a really good northern pike fishery as well. I've always kind of secretly wished they'd dump a few muskies in there, of course, but it's a very interesting fishery, and tremendous amount of fish get caught out there every year. And it's a really good point you make for the Red Lake experience, and really a majority of the larger lakes in Minnesota. They really do a pretty good job of keeping those lakes open to to vehicles, which is ideally you can bring the most stuff out there. But once they get those plowed roads out there, that really opens things up to a little more comfort in general, a little more ease of getting out there and being able to do your thing maybe for just a couple hours in the evening or morning or whatever it might be, and get out there and catch some fish on prime time.
And, I liken Red Lake a lot to a big lake we have here in Wisconsin, Lake Winnebago, which is actually the biggest inland lake in the United States, or I think that's correct. But it is amazing that what I have found the last couple of years, Pete, and I think this would apply to Red Lake too, I don't want to fish where all the trucks are and all the shacks. These fish spook easy in, 18 feet of water or less. And I'd really think if I'm going, and I do this with experts on Winnebago all the time, we never to go near the traffic. I mean, a car door slamming, a hole being drilled, a truck riding over. There's nothing to hold these fish because they're not holding the structure. They're eating insects in the mud. And any disturbance above them can spook them. There's no reason for them to come back. They'll just look for another feeding area. And you've hollered at me over the years, too, about driving my Yamaha around on the ice. But do you think it's a good idea to explore on your own instead of going out to these real popular spots where the giant crowds are?
Oh, well, I think that's, frankly, just about always the case. Even if you're, to a certain extent, fishing specific structures, obviously it all depends on how busy things are out there. But, if you're on a prime location, but you're sharing it with a half a dozen other people that are good at what they're doing, that obviously cuts down the amount of fish you're going to catch. So I think in a lot of cases, if a lake is heavily fished, sometimes you're better off, again, even if it's specific structures, you're better off getting away from the crowd, trying to find your own fish where you got them all to yourself, and you can fish all parts of a structure, deep end, shallow, without infringing on somebody else's space that's trying to fish that same structure. I personally don't enjoy that because I too, just the general enjoyment of the experience, I don't like getting in other people's space. And it's so fun if you feel like you're encroaching that boundary a little bit. So you go get your own piece of structure and you can fish it however you want. And you can check all the different ranges and depths. And I talk about that all the time, John. I know we literally, every time we've ever done a muskie show, we're talking about trying a bunch of different things structurally, depths and lures and blah, 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 so you can pattern things. And you've got the ability to do that on the ice as well when you've got a structure all to yourself. Now back to the whole idea of some of these mud basin lakes, and I've personally never been on Winnebago, but I understand what it is, and I've talked with you about it for a long time. And there's a lot of places like that. Obviously, one is including Red Lake. There's a lot of area like that, frankly, on Leech Lake and a lot of the different lakes that we fish. And in that case, yeah, you definitely do not want to go with the crowd at all because, there are not opportunities, but situations where other people are going to spook your fish if it is shallower, especially something like a Red Lake where a lot of times you're fishing really shallow water and you're going to be running over the top, and there is a lot of pressure out there. I think it's, if a lake is more, let's say, green or little pressured, there's less of a chance that the vehicles are going to make a difference. But I think fish do learn, to whatever extent it could be, and they've learned that bad things happen when they hear ATVs over their head. That's John Gillespie coming.
Yeah, right.
I know he's going to try and catch me, and I'm going to get out of here. But very seriously, yeah. And the other thing with a shallow mud area where fish are roaming, they will stick around to a certain extent. Every day is different, but generally those fish are roamers, period, even without vehicles running around. So really, it's not a bad idea to just, especially if you got young guys out there, to drill a whole bunch of holes right away in some area that doesn't have any other anglers, and then that way you're moving around and you don't have to worry about the auger itself. Even if you're not running an ATV, if you're just walking with an auger, you don't have to worry as much about those fish spooking. And you're probably going to catch more fish if you're doing that in just about every case. Once in a while, you can get lucky and have fish holding in an area, and you really don't have to move. But especially the mud bite, you're better off moving in general.
Well, talking about fishing opportunities coming up in February, because of the really late ice that we had come on some of our lakes here because of the warm January, Winnebago just got safe ice a couple of weeks ago, Pete, and Winnebago is a tremendous ice fishing spot to try in February. The jumbo perch are biting, and I'll tell you what, there's a lot of them in there right now. And, we were on there a couple of weeks ago, folks, and I was amazed at the size of the walleyes. 18 inches with big stomachs. I've never seen them like that on Winnebago. There's been a huge hatch of emerald shiners and shad. Those fish are just fat. And the white bass are big, too. And the west side of Winnebago, again, has safe ice for the first time this year. And I'll tell you what, that is a great spot to try in February. Also, Pete, by the way, the west side of the Bay of Green Bay actually has safe ice now, too, for the first time this year. And guys off of Ocano are doing real well catching perch. And in the evenings, there's a few walleyes being caught in the very early morning. The same deal. So those are two spots that haven't really been hit hard this year. So those will be great opportunities to try in February. The east side of the Bay of Green Bay, sketchy ice. I don't even know, Pete, if I would venture out on the east side of the bay, the Door County area. But, you and I, one thing that you and I have done in the past, in the spring together, is fish open water on the Fox River in Green Bay. And that'll normally open up mid to late February. And, there's a crowd there, Pete, but it is a great opportunity to get in the boat and catch some walleyes in the Green Bay area and De Pere, isn't it? You've enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, especially if you haven't been in a boat for quite some time, like was the case with me. Up here, there's not a whole lot of open water opportunities. You were talking earlier about what you can do down there for open water and some of the the Mississippi and obviously the Big Lake Michigan down there. You've got that opportunity to do pretty much all winter. So even though it's crowded and, because it's it is a walleye run to a certain extent, the fish are stacked up in there. And unfortunately with that comes stacked up anglers who've been waiting around all winter to try and get out on the water. So that's part of the deal. But it is fun. And actually even with all of the people, you usually have a pretty good fishing experience as well. You're still going to catch quite a few fish and see a lot of other nets flying and that kind of thing. One thing I should say, considering the weather to a certain extent, we've talked about how it's been really tough around here, and now even next door over by Rob in Vilas County. One thing to really keep in mind that we're going to watch for, and actually will be changing weekly. Are these ice conditions? There is a chance with some cold. At least it should be, walkable first to not be bad for the slush. But we may finally get some decent ice conditions here with the with the cold. And that's another thing I always look at is, if bad ice conditions have kept all of the pressure off a lot of these inland lakes, which it has, I would say there's probably, 20% of the direct ice fishing pressure that's been on our lakes around here that, that would be in a normal year. A month and a half, when you think about that, that's a big break for the fish. The fish haven't been targeted all that much. So, there might be some pretty good opportunities around here. I know I've never seen so much where I'm driving by. Obviously, I've lived here all my life, and I'm checking out spots visually in a lot of cases where there's almost always people ice fishing, and so many times now I'm like, wow, there's nobody even been out there. There's nobody out there now. There's nobody. You look at the tracks and you don't see any tracks. So there's been a real lack of fishing pressure in the places where the ice conditions have been tough, and that could just straighten out here fairly quickly and be a pretty good bite too. So always something to look for.
That's funny you say that. I was fishing Winnebago, like I told you a couple of weeks ago, and Captain Matt Merton, my guy who guides over there, and I asked him a question on camera. I said, Matt, what do you think of this late start to ice fishing? And he looked at the camera and smiled. It saved thousands and thousands and thousands of fish's lives because nobody could get out there, and exploit the fishery, which is a good point, Yeah, truly a good point. Hey, one other thing I want to mention. We get into late February, and a great opportunity, another great open water opportunity is the walleyes on Lake Erie, Pete. The thing there, though, is you have to watch water clarity. If they have a big wind, it buds up the lake and you can't do it. But as soon as you got a couple of calm days or a southwest wind down there in the Ohio area, you can get a boat out there. And this is the time of year, Pete, where you really have a shot at catching those 10, 11, 12-pound walleyes. And it's a slow trolling technique off of Port Clinton. And you remember I told you Blake got a 14-pounder there a couple of years ago. But that's also a great opportunity, very late winter, early spring. You get a streak of calm weather, get your boat down there and slow troll big profile jerk baits, like number 10s, Rapellas. The Livingston lures work really good down there. But that's also a great opportunity to get your boat in the water, get down there, and keep every walleye you catch. Can you believe that? I've told you that. They want you to keep everything, Pete.
Oh, I know, and I was just going to mention it. I kind of figured you would, but it is an extremely unique situation, and over the years now that we've been filming together, you've been filming on Erie basically from the start, right? And I have had to, as the guy that's known as Captain Conservation and constantly talking about proper handling and release and preserving genetics and this, that, and the other, and I've been telling people for years and years and years and years, as have you actually, except for the case of Erie, that you want to be releasing those female walleyes and try and protect the fishery. So and then all of a sudden, John Gillespie goes to Lake Erie, and he's keeping every single fish that he catches. And suddenly, Pete, why do you film with that guy? That's horrible. He's keeping those walleyes, and it's a terrible thing. And in any other case on the North American continent, I would agree with that. But when you first told me about that policy there, that you were literally told that was the thing to do, I remember telling you, boy, that just doesn't make any sense. I can't imagine that's going to work out well in the long run, and amazingly it has. So that has to be a fishery in and of itself, like nothing else out there, because I've never seen anything like that, where there's literally commercial harvest and all angler harvest. What is it? 6 a person? Is the limit?
Well, they're thinking about going to a 10-fish limit this year.
10. Yeah.
Yeah, they're thinking about going to a 10 fish limit. And real quickly, the logic behind the deal down there on Erie about keeping all your fish is there's a sportsman's quota and a commercial quota. If the
Correct.
sportsmen don't meet their catch quota, then that leftover tonnage goes to the commercial guys. So the fish are going to get harvested anyway. And they had record hatches in 2015 or 2015 and 2017. And when we go there this spring, we're expecting our male walleyes to be 20 to 25 inches long. Now, those are the males, if you can believe that. But here's my deal on Lake Erie, Pete. People love to keep fish, right? You go down to Lake Erie, there's no possession limit. You go down there for 5 days, you can take 5 days of limit home. And they encourage you to keep. And, you know, you and I love to practice catch and release on the walleyes here. There, they encourage you to keep them. And, again, no possession limit. I think that's the perfect place for a guy who loves to eat fish. Go fill your freezer there for the rest of the summer and come back here and let your walleyes go, right?
There you go. There you go. It's a unique situation because very seldom do you have an opportunity to catch a huge specimen of any species and also be told to keep them all. So yeah, if you that's a unique opportunity. If you like a chance at a big walleye and you like to eat walleyes, that's best place on earth to go that I know of, frankly. And it's been going on so long, it obviously is just a tremendously unique situation. And it's a tremendous fishery. Unfortunately for me, it's 15 hours away, so I haven't been over there much. But and in seeing what you've done there over the years, it really is a tremendous fishery and a great opportunity.
And, of course, we got our buddy Mike Patterson over there who, in my opinion, is one of the most knowledgeable anglers on Lake Erie. And if folks want to go on a guide trip or ask him for information, he's such a nice guy. He'd be happy to help you out. And, of course, his name and number are on our webpage, aren't they, Ryan? GillespieFishing.com. Actually, all the guys we work with, you can get hold of via GillespieFishing.com. Hey, talking about a little bit of technique this time of year, you know, we spend a lot of time this winter talking about basin fish and catching basin crappies and bluegills and even game fish. Now, as you get into later February, do these fish start migrating back to the weed edges, or are you still going to concentrate on the basin areas in these lakes?
Generally, it's really fishery dependent. I see some places where the fish do stay right in the basin, basically till ice out, and generally that's smaller lake situations where obviously they don't have traveling to do to speak of to get to spawning areas or anything like that because the lakes are smaller. But it really depends on the fishery and the forage base and all of that. But generally you'll start to see some of the fish come in shallower. And if they're in a lot of cases, there's still some pretty green weeds in some of these clearer lakes. And the other thing is, to a certain extent, the whole green weed thing is a little overrated. Fish will use dead weeds as well as structure, especially once the lakes start opening up. And, if the oxygen levels are low, they're probably not going to. But if the oxygen levels are up, once water starts flowing back in a little bit, they'll go wherever they're comfortable and wherever they find forage to eat. And ideally near their spawning zones, because they do spawn fairly early, right after the ice goes out. So that's going to be something to definitely look for. But if it's been a basin bite all winter on a particular body of water, essentially the simple thing to do that works is, and of course now we've got more tools than ever to go search for the fish to a certain extent. Right, knowledge of where the basins are and prior knowledge, where they've been, you know where you caught them. But if they start to disappear and you move around a little bit, well, That's when you start looking a little shallower generally. The one thing that can be a little tough for people, because people tend to be more bottom oriented, I think. I even slip in my head sometimes and forget about it. And I find myself, I move on, and I never did try that option. But once in a while in the spring, fish will just suspend much higher as well. So you're maybe not going to see them on your electronics like you're used to seeing, and they may only be 5-6 feet under the ice in some cases. So that's something to watch for as well, to try and, before you maybe give up on an area, try and see if the fish are up really high. But other than that, move and start trying some of the different structures. That's gonna get you on the fish.
Well, hey, I want to remind the folks that are watching next month's edition, the March edition, you can ask Pete and I specific questions, and they can do that how, Ryan? Going to GillespieFishing.com, ask your question, and we'll answer it coming up in our March edition. In summary, quickly, I got one last question for you that might take you a while to answer. But in summary, from what I've learned looking forward to February, folks, great ice in North and South Dakota. They're catching big perch and walleyes on devils. The South Dakota area, the glacier lakes have been producing a lot. We talked about Minnesota, Wisconsin, Lake Erie. But before we go, Pete, you and I have had a lot of discussions about this, and you kind of touched on it before. We're using the Humminbird Mega Live unit right now, which is an incredible tool. It's almost like having a telescope. You can look underwater where the fish are. You have any thoughts on this technology that's gone so far as to show you where the fish are and what they're doing?
Oh, that's a interesting one and a tough one to a certain extent. Well, on one hand, I could say I can jump up and down and say it's one of the neatest things I've ever seen. Frankly, you and I talk about it because obviously we were both there before we had even any kind of flasher drilling holes through the ice, and I still think back my younger days when I was bouncing jigs on the bottom with absolutely no eyes other than my own in my head, and of course I'm just staring at the ice, and I would fish and fish and fish and fish, and then of course you get a hold of the first flasher, and now running with the Helix, I like looking at the 2D sonar. After I did it for years without it, but after experiencing it, I don't even know if I could ice fish if they took that away, at least from a jigging standpoint. I might set tip-ups, obviously, and that kind of thing, but it's so awesome to see it. Now, obviously, the Mega Live technology allows us to, drill holes and look all around you in 360 degrees and pick off fish, literally look for the fish. I don't know how many people out there have experienced it yet. I'm sure it's got to be at least 30-40%, I would guess, that have seen the technology work. It really is a game changer. I mean, to be able to not only see the fish below you, but now to scope that big of an area all around you and be able to really rip through an area. If you've never fished a bigger body of water at all, and you've got a big basin area that you can check, I mean, gosh, you're going to be able to do it with that. We talked about spooking earlier. I don't, as far as those things look out, I think you're not going to spook them out of the range that you can cover with Mega Live. So you can find fish amazingly fast and keep moving depending on how hard you want to work. You can keep using that as a tool, continue to drill holes, literally stay right on top of fish. And in a lot of cases, you drill on top of them and they're still there and you can immediately catch them. That being said, I love it and it's neat and whatever, but it is kind of scary in the hands of people, frankly, that are just not going to be responsible as far as keeping fish. and that's a little spooky to me, especially on these smaller fisheries where I've seen, some of the lakes I fish in the winter are as small as 30, 40 acres, and obviously
Yeah.
I consider that, and those are the kind of bodies of water where I essentially don't keep fish to eat at all, unless it's a handful of medium-sized ones. You gotta recognize what you're on there. But especially some of these smaller water bodies, which for me here in the upper part of Wisconsin, most of the water bodies we have, I mean, I don't even know. I guess a guy like me should know exactly what, if you take the top third of Wisconsin, what the average size lake is, but I bet it's below 1,000 acres. And, with this kind of technology, frankly, I think a lake could literally be wiped out if everybody was out there to catch as many panfish as they could and keep them all that they could legally keep. So that part, to a certain extent, scares me to death. But it's, I think, as long as we're responsible with it from a harvest standpoint, that there's not going to be any issues at all. But people got to be very aware of how fragile these fisheries can be.
Good point. And before we close, I want to remind, it actually slipped my mind, one of the great spots to fish in February is both Chequamegon Bay and the eel pout run on the St. Louis Harbor and the St. Louis River. That Chequamegon Bay, you love going up there, and it's really good. What type of trout is in Chequamegon through the ice, Pete? I know the season is open year round.
Well, a little bit of everything. There's quite a few browns caught, and obviously, depending on depth and stuff, the Lakers, but they got a lot of splake as well. Whitefish can be pretty good. Well, the people don't target them as much up there, but I've heard of people just being able to smash those whitefish as well. So, it's one of those things you never really know what you're going to come across in there. That's part of what makes it interesting as well. But yeah, I would say browns and splake are some of the the most targeted to a certain extent. And now that you get a little more ice with the cold, you can get out and get the lake trout. Get on a little bit deeper water out there. And as far as the St. Louis River, that's kind of interesting that that eel pout bite can be real good. It seems like they move in and move out fairly quickly. Now that actually was really good up until a couple of weeks ago, and then kind of died. Now that run is somewhat over, but that's a real good opportunity as well. And then I can't think offhand now on the exact dates because I've only done it a few times, but one opportunity there too for open water. Once it opens up, you've got a brief period where you can catch and release the sturgeon as well, which is a opportunity. We're gonna have to talk about that the next time. I'll get more details on that, on exactly the when, how long, when it opens and whatever. But I've done that a few times, and that's a real neat opportunity too. Those are just a blast to catch those fish.
Oh yeah, they are. And in closing, I want to mention, dude, you brought up eel pout, and you and I both love to eat eel pout or lawyers or whatever their names are. And actually, in mid to late February, these eel pout on Lake Winnebago, on Leech Lake over in Minnesota, on Mille Lacs, they're the first freshwater fish to spawn. So they'll move up on these shallow rocks, and I'll tell you what, you can whale on them. And it's freshwater cod. There's nothing better to taste. And I tell you, Pete, last February we were actually on Winnebago sight fishing them in 2 feet of water in an ice shack and catching them. But they're the first fish to spawn, and they bite really, really well on the big lakes, especially through the ice this time of year. You know that too, right?
Oh yeah. No, it's just awesome, and they're a very interesting fish to fish for and jig for. They're much more aggressive than you would think. Just, looking at them, you think kind of the ugly, bottom feeder type fish, and they are very aggressive, fun to catch, hit real hard, and yeah, for something that's actually surprisingly good to eat. But now we gotta we gotta make sure people consider releasing them as well. Don't want to eat them all.
I agree.
I agree. Run out.
Yeah, 10 years ago, no, maybe a little longer than that, 15, 20 years ago, when we used to catch them in Door County by mistake, they were called stompers. You know why they were called stompers?
Oh, yeah.
Because guys would put them on the ice and stomp on them and leave them for the birds to eat. That was until people are starting to really figure out how good they are. So, yeah, don't go overboard. But, hey, man, that's about all the time we got today. And I want to thank you for joining me. And if folks have questions about techniques, spots, all of that, they can write their question to us at GillespieFishing.com. And we'll answer those questions on next month's Pete and John's AMSOIL Talking Fishing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That'll make it good. It's always good to have questions, and sometimes I really like what some people come up with. They can dream up things that I always think of everything, but not always. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, all right, my friend. I will see you soon, and catch us next month, right?
Absolutely.